Well, it is
Nothing.
almost 5 of 10. We wanted to start at 10 of 10, but anyways, good morning, everyone. It's Tuesday, January 17th.
Yeah, I'll talk about after
Second
this.
half of the month. That's
Yeah.
great. So we have Ellen Keel with us and Jake Carlo.
Claro, Claro, yeah.
Claro. And so we're going to talk again about our food systems and how and what we might be able to do to improve that for our citizens. And we've got until noon, so we got a long straight through time. We'll take a little break maybe if we need it around 11. But I'd like to have the committee introduce themselves, and then you folks can get those 2 chairs at the head of the table. And so we'll have a presentation, a good discussion. So, Ryan?
Yep, Senator Collmore from the Rutland District. Morning, good to see you guys.
Hi, Irene Renner, Chittenden North.
Brian Campion, Bennington County.
Rich Westman, Wyoming.
And I'm Bobby Stark from Orleans County. So welcome, and maybe we have 3 new members here to the Ag Committee. So when you introduce yourselves, you probably give a little spiel on how long you've been doing, what you're doing, and how bad you've been doing it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, it's great to have you both with us. We've done this for quite a while, and there's a few things I think we're doing good. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
so welcome, and I don't know which one of you want to start.
I'll start that, yeah.
Sure.
Great.
So let's go for it.
Yeah, well, thank you so very much. We always look forward to this conversation, and especially because there are 3 of you who are new to this committee, and Senator, you're new to the whole hit and caboodle here at the State House, right?
I am, and I should mention that I'm also in Fairfax with one town, so
Fairfax,
it's
okay.
very rural.
Yes, know that. Yep, great. So what we thought we would do for you today, typically what we've always done in the past, and this is part of the statute of the Farm to Plate Investment Program that we administer, is we normally come in and provide an annual report of the last year's activities. And we will be doing that with you next week in jointly with House Ag. We often have traditionally done it as a joint meeting. So we'll be doing that next week to really focus in on the fiscal 22 activities. However, because so many of you are new, because this is a new biennium, we thought that it would be good to provide some history and some grounding in the state strategic plan for developing our food system so that you can then have some more familiarity with it and be able to use it throughout the session as you're getting other people coming in to give you testimony, give you a good, strong grounding of what's going on out there on the land, in our food manufacturing, in our distribution, the whole entire food system. And happy to have this be as much of a discussion and asking of questions as is useful for you all, because this is really for you all, is your time to learn more about the food system in Vermont so that you can do your work as effectively as possible. I'm going to cover a little bit of the history and sort of what transpired over the first 10 years of the Farm to Plate Investment Program through this retrospective. And then Jake's going to walk you through the strategic plan for the current 10-year cycle that we're in, and walk you through how to use this document as a resource and a tool for your policy work. Okay?
Yep.
Bobby, can I just ask one quick question? So is this is it part of the Agency of Ag?
No.
No, okay, that was the
Yeah,
one place. Okay,
I'll-
that's helpful.
I'll start
Great,
there.
Thank you.
So the Sustainable Jobs Fund, I'm the executive director of the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund. Jake is the Farm to Plate director, which is a program within the Jobs Fund. I've been there since 2005. The Sustainable Jobs Fund was actually created by an act of the legislature in 1995. You were here, Senator, for that. And it was intended to be outside of state government, so we are a 501c3 organization, independent organization. Our statute, if you were to take a look at it online, will show you that the Secretary of Commerce or designee is Secretary of Ag or designee, and one seat is appointed by the governor. And then we have 8 independent members. So we're this interesting sort of quasi-governmental entity. And but very much a nonprofit with a 501c3 nonprofit status. So we work very closely with various agencies, the Agency of Commerce, Agency of Ag, Natural Resources, Health Department, FP&R. We have very strong relationships and good communication, good working relationship. And we can do things often from a process standpoint that inside state government they may be more challenged to do because of the rules by which they are governed. So having this sort of inside outside kind of connection has proved to be actually very useful, right? There's lots of stuff at the Agency of Ag that really they are best suited to do, and that we're like so excited that they're doing it and they're doing it well. And then there's stuff that really is better suited for an organization like us to do. So that's how we sort of divide and conquer. When in 2009, the legislature created the Farm to Plate Investment Program. It was an interesting first time ever really initiative, as you'll recall, where House Ag and Commerce Committee and the Senate Ag and Senate Economic Development Committee worked collaboratively to create and launch that program because the notion was agricultural development is the same as economic development. It is a form of economic development, especially for our rural communities. But prior to Farm to Plate, that was not understood, especially by the economic development community. You take a look at, just as a point of reference, the website of thinkvermont.com back in 2008, 2009, there was like no real reference to agriculture, to breweries, to the working landscape, any of that. Now it is front and center on their website, right? It is like, come to Vermont, experience our working landscape, experience our breweries, and drink our milk, and have our maple syrup, and take it back with you, right? Totally
Stay at
different.
our tiny farm.
Exactly.
visitors' house and-
Exactly. Wouldn't you say, Senator? It's like it is really quite a radical difference,
Oh, definitely.
Right?
Yeah.
right? So that is in part, I would like to say, I think it's because of the way we have come together as a community of organizations, from nonprofits, the business, to the state government entities, to capital providers, to educators, to really work together towards the greater effort that's in the statute of the outcomes for this program. And the outcomes are around increasing economic activity and jobs within the farm and food sector, to work on improving water, soil, overall land use in a sound environmental way, and then providing healthy local food for all Vermonters. So there's the really those 3 components of the economics, the environment, and the social justice and equity piece is baked into this statute. It is what governs us. It is what guides us. And it is absolutely the thread that links that is embedded in the state, in this plan that was created. So we take it very seriously. We track metrics on it every year. And so that's part of what we do when we come in to you to meet with you, is we share where are we at? What are the trend lines saying? What's happening? So it was set up as a 10-year initiative in 2009. We published the first plan in January of 2011 when Governor Shumlin arrived. The legislature tasked the Jobs Fund with serving in this planning, implementation, monitoring role rather than the Agency of Agriculture, which was also quite unique at the time. I think it was actually a very useful way of doing a project like this or a program like this, because it was basically saying, we want to see a 10-year plan. We know that there's going to be changes in administration. So we don't want to have a plan that's, like for one administration and then a completely different plan for another administration. And so as it is, we've been working with 3 different governors, right, over this last period, right? And that stability, I think, has been a really powerful part, is giving people sense like, oh, we're all in this together. Doesn't matter what the party is, doesn't matter what's going on with who's the secretary, like this is our collective plan, right? So, and it was over a 10-year horizon. So in 2019, we approached Senator Starr and then Chair Partridge and said, do you want us to keep going with this? Do you want another 10 years or not? And we asked all of our partners in the field the same thing. And you all felt like, yeah, no, we can't stop now. So in 2019, you all reauthorized Farm to Plate to do a second 10-year plan and to go at it through 2030. And I think that it's also that from a policy perspective, I think is really smart when you set something up as a legislative body for a 10-year time horizon, to then use that 10-year mark to like evaluate, how are we doing? Is this worth continuing? And then making a very intentional decision. Okay, yes, or okay, no. And in this case, you all said yes. And so we set about in 2020 and 2021, and we worked very closely with the Agency of Agriculture to craft this document, which is now considered the state's food system development plan. It has informed the Governor's Commission on the Future of Agriculture. They use this as a foundational document. I serve on that commission, and I spend a lot of time briefing the other commissioners about what's in here. They use it very, like it's the base, it's the foundation. Jake served on the Agriculture and Ecosystem Committee for the Vermont Climate Action Council and planning process. He brought this to that process. And so there's a lot of the recommendations stem from what's in this document. The Agency of Agriculture and their strategic plan references all of this on a regular basis. So we've worked really hard to, in essence, be in alignment with one another, so that we all have our different means, right? And different focus, but we're all going in the same direction.
All pulling the wagon up
Exactly.
together.
Exactly.
Not some going backwards, some
Yeah.
sideways.
Exactly. And
it works. So.
it's really powerful. So farm to school is embedded in this,
Great.
right? The universal meals is embedded in this. It's one of the core strategies. So the work that the food bank is doing, like all the food security stuff is in here, right? So this is the foundation that, you could very easily ask anybody that comes in to present to you, how does it relate to the strategic plan? And they should be able to tell you.
The last week we had some folks talking about our own food, how much. But they claim that we're still short of food here in Vermont, that what 2 in 5 or a number like that are food insufficient and insecure.
Yep.
And golly, we've been at this quite a while to still have some in trouble. And we didn't question those numbers, but I know we certainly have a lot more people producing food than we used to have, and it's helped our rural economy and rural areas of Vermont very much. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that speaks to the fact that the food system is not something that's in isolation to every other system. So our overall economic system has created incredible wealth inequalities, and we haven't got the childcare system we need, and the housing and the workforce, and all of these things interact, they all intersect. And it's one of the things that we plan to spend a lot more time on these next 10 years is where there's overlap between these systems, because we can't solve food insecurity in isolation for a whole bunch of other systems.
no.
So just to give you a quick recap of the first, so on page 7 of this document, just as a grounding, this is what we mean when we talk about a food system. It incorporates inputs, production, processing, wholesale, retail, the consumer aspect of it in terms of consumer demand. What ag literacy? What are people wanting to eat? And then nutrient management. And then the outer ring, so the inner ring is really the private sector. It's really what we're trying to do is to focus policy programs, funding, alignments, strengthening the overall connectivity between businesses, because the businesses are the ones that create the food for us, right? And then it's the outer ring of policymakers like yourselves, government agencies, nonprofits like us, food hubs, the educational system that is the support system for our food system, right? And so we're trying to strengthen all of those components because they all interact and are all important to each other. So if you pop to page 10, there's a diagram there that just, I'm not going to go into the details of it, but once we released the plan in January of 2011, we then formed a network of organizations, because the definition of a system is that it's complex and that no one organization can fix it. And can really truly transform it or change it. It takes a collaborative, multi-organizational approach. And so we built this network around the key areas of the food system that we learned through the stakeholder engagement process we did from the first plan about where there was real challenges. So we learned about aggregation and distribution needs, where small producers had trouble getting into markets, especially out of state.
And we want to talk more about that.
Yeah.
To see if that needs improving. If there's something that we can do in the legislature to expand that so that we aren't missing growers and they have an adequate place to take their supplies.
Yes, absolutely. We'll get with that when we jump over to Jake, because that's definitely an area that we see needs some attention. We did a lot on education and workforce development. For instance, we published a career guide for jobs in the food system a few years ago. We've done a lot in looking at farmland access. We've looked a lot at strengthening the business and technical assistance service provision to farms and food businesses. There's been a lot of real tangible projects, a lot of key documents really that have been developed. And in part, what we see as our role is to help with what we call sense making. Everything is, because things are so complex, it can often be challenging to really understand, well, what's really going on? What's the stuff that's underneath what might be visible to us and sort of in a crisis mode? And what's really underneath that? And so a lot of what, like, for instance, in the early days, there are two quick examples. A lot of producers were wanting to sell to Sodexo, into UVM and to the Sodexo accounts in the institutions. But there were some key structural things related to contracting practices that Sodexo had that none of us understood. And if you couldn't crack the vendor contracting process, how to become a qualified vendor, you were never going to sell into Sodexo. So we did a whole forum. We brought Sodexo leadership together with producers and service providers, and they put it out on the table. They said, this is how you become a certified vendor with us. And producers were like, great, okay. Some of them said, I'm not interested. Others were like, no, I want to do that. The point is, it was something that was not visible, right? And we helped create a way to make what was invisible visible. And then producers could decide whether or not they wanted to take advantage of that, right? The same thing was happening, as Senator Starr will know well, during 2010, 2011, 13, even up to 2014. There was a real lack of slaughterhouse capacity in the state, and small producers were really struggling. And so we pulled together people, businesses across the entire supply chain. It's the first time really this has happened, with small producers, processors, chefs, distributors, service providers. Vita was at the table, like the entire supply chain. People that work in grocery stores at meat counters that were looking for qualified meat cutters. everybody together to really unpack and understand what's really going on here. Because as Senator Starr might remember, the initial thought was, well, let's just build more slaughterhouse capacity, right? And what we found was that wasn't really the issue. We didn't have meat cutters and processing and storage for the animals that were like, there was plenty of time when the kill floor space was not being used, but it was the processing that was the bottleneck. So had we not dug into that and really looked at what was really going on, we would have potentially spent a lot of money to build slaughterhouses that we didn't actually need at that time.
Had no people to run them.
Right?
Yeah.
And no people to run them. So what that did though, that process, Mark Curran, who was then owner of Black River Produce, was at those meetings and had sort of an inkling in his mind about meat. He got really interested in this and then bought the old Ben & Jerry's facility down in North Springfield and turned it into what then became Black River Meats and Vermont Packing House as a joint project with Lorenzo Meats out in Wisconsin, Minnesota. And so now he sold that, but that added capacity came on at a time that then for a period of time really actually solved the problem. It actually was a major piece of capacity at scale that really supported things. We then heard a few years later from the processors, we don't have enough animals. We've got more processing capacity now. We need more animals, right? This is how supply and demand works. So now we're back, the pendulum is swung again, and we don't have enough capacity, and we have more animals. We have more market opportunity. The pandemic really showed this, right? So now we're at a place again where and there's been a lot more federal awareness about this, federal dollars being put forward. The USDA and Secretary Tebbets has been his team has been a real leader on this, of really helping to get more funding to going to expanding existing processing. There was just a really large, was it $1 million SIG grant or $1.2 million grant that the Agency of Commerce awarded to Vermont slaughter and meat processing in Ferrisburg. 1.3 million to expand that
They said
facility.
that's gonna be about a $4 million total cost project when it gets done.
Yeah,
They'll be able to run some animals through there.
yeah, exactly. And a part of the state that desperately needs that extra capacity, right?
Yeah.
So we have a convening power as an organization where we can bring people together who have vested interests in the system working, but they can't do it alone, right? They need to be connected to people on the other side of where they are in the supply chain to understand how the system works better so that they can then better adjust their business to meet the market opportunity, because the market opportunity is absolutely there, right? So if you flip to page 19, I'll just sort of on the bottom corner there, sort of the big aha takeaway highlights are that Vermont's food system, all in, direct, indirect, induced, sort of the size of the food system is $11.9 billion as of 2017. So by now it's probably well over $12 billion. And 2.9, probably now well over 3 billion is just food manufacturing. So again, we're talking big numbers. This is in totality. I mean, dairy is the biggest within the food system, but the food system compared to say tourism or other types of manufacturing or other types of services, healthcare, this is a big deal, right? And it's where our rural economies connect the most. So it is important. It is so vital, you know, from a working landscape, a heritage, a history, as well as the economics.
People don't understand how important our total agricultural money is around the state. And, you know, they think of it as, well, it's a few dollars here and a few dollars there. But boy, when you add it all up, it used to be, and not that many years ago, our milk production is down a little bit, but not a lot. But it used to be like 85% of the milk went south to southern New England and in New York, and now, you know, 65 to 70% of our milk stays home and it's being manufactured here, so it's given, you know, hundreds of people jobs and good jobs. like at Ben and Jerry's or over at Cabot or down to the yogurt plant. And a lot of small processors, they process their own. And Jasper Hill's got a big crew that works there. And it's good that our economy is growing, but it's all inclusive right here at home.
Yeah.
And so it's giving a lot of people work and certainly helped a lot of our rural communities.
Just the farmers markets are incredible to me.
Yeah.
From 20 years ago, I remember like Craftsberry had just a few little things. And now
Yeah.
they're just
Totally.
everywhere.
Yeah.
People
they
pack
come.
them and it's incredible.
Yeah,
And, there's over 65,000 people that are employed in the food system.
How many?
65,000.
Yeah.
A lot of it is in restaurant, a lot of it is in restaurant and
Yeah.
food service,
Yeah.
but it's still connected to food,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, you can produce all you want, but if you don't have a means of selling it and people to help sell it, like, right, we're not gonna do it all. Unfortunately, as great as farmers markets and CSAs are,
Yeah.
they still only represent about 3% of total farm gate sales in the
Wow.
state. Right,
Yeah.
very important
Yeah,
from
yeah.
from an interface, learning what the customer wants, ag literacy, those kinds of things. But it's never gonna be the big mover of large quantities of food as a market outlet, right? It has other functions, right? So the other thing to know is that we, back in 2010, when we were in the process of developing the first plan, we wanted to know, well, how much local production was being consumed by Vermonters. And there was no way to actually know that. So we created a methodology with, at the time, UVM Professor David Connor and a couple of a grad student of his. And back then, actually Auditor Hoffer was actually involved in the conversation because he's, a big data guy. And anyways, we created a methodology that actually has been peer reviewed and is now accepted as sort of a good process for trying to count up local food consumption. At the time, we could count reliably only 2.5%. We estimated that we were probably consuming about 5%, which is like a pretty small number still. And that was about $114 million that we could count, right? That we had a sense about. And then we did the same count process every 3 years. And in 2020, we had gotten up to 16% and 371 million. So 10-year period, about $257 million more of Vermont produced and consumed here sales. And that includes Vermont restaurants, people that eat away from home, as well as buying to food for eating at home. So huge impact. But again, because we were tasked by all of you to report back, we took that very seriously, and we built in the processes to be collecting the metrics to be able to keep track of these trends, right? And that's been a really powerful way then. The economic development community, for instance, the regional development corporations, the Department of Economic Development, as I said, they didn't really understand what was going on in 2009, 2011. When we started publishing the data that showed that $3 billion of food manufacturing was happening, they could understand food manufacturing because it's manufacturing. So they got very excited, and now they're like, oh, well, how can we help? We've got businesses in our regions. How do we help them when they need to grow into a bigger facility? How do I help them find the places? In your region, NVDA has been instrumental.
A lot of
Finding locations, helping with federal funding streams.
Well, and that yellow
Barn,
barn project in Hardwick, which is, it's close to home. We're all in it together right
Exactly.
there.
Exactly.
That's gonna be exciting and will
Totally.
help too as we move forward.
Yeah. But that none of that existed back in 2008, 2009, it wasn't. So on pages 21 through page 26, but definitely 34, 21 to 34. What we tried to do in this document was to provide some results of it over a 10-year time horizon. So I won't go over this, but just for your light reading, at night when you have nothing else to do, you can take a look at these very quickly, get some snapshots of the trend lines for things like land and agriculture and stream miles impaired, and how that's been turning around, and net losses and gains for farms and dairy sales, and increased meat processing infrastructure, and beverage and manufacturing sales, like all those institutional sales. On page 39, we made huge changes and improvements in the institutional sales, and then of course COVID happened, and K through 12 sales went up because we were investing heavily in making sure that kids had food during the pandemic. But take a look at the drop in higher ed. Hospitals went up in local food. I'm on page 29. But hospitals went up, and but institutional sales, colleges really dropped because schools were closed.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, is like we're tracking these trends so that we can see what might be going on, and where there might be, we better, get in on this a little bit more and see if there's a bottleneck that needs to be fixed.
Has this recovered, by the way,
It has,
for the schools?
it has, but we don't know what it is because we haven't done a count, but we expect that the next,
Yeah, 2023 will be your next
Yeah.
count.
Yeah,
Sorry.
and I think higher ed will probably be slightly below what was the peak in 2017. And that's, I think enrollment numbers and also just, on campus living situations are different. So it might be slightly lower than it was previously.
Bobby, may I say something about higher ed? It's interesting, I'm also at Bennington College,
Sure.
and parents are so much different. Well, kids are different today, of course, and it really matters what's in the cafeteria. When they're coming through for admissions, it wasn't something that I thought about or parents necessarily thought about when they were visiting colleges and universities. But today, especially a college in Vermont, if they can say, so Bennington has like a little local products area, and they try to get more local, but as much as we can do to kind of help them. Like one of the things I say to Bennington College is, I'd love to see Wilcox ice cream there. I don't know why I'm not seeing Wilcox ice cream there, but Wilcox ice cream's in Arlington. I think it's the best ice cream. How can we, I'm not sure what the holdups are there. So anything you can do to help those institutions, I really appreciate it. Because it helps admissions, it helps everything.
Yeah,
Sorry.
totally.
No, it's okay. No, I was just gonna say, I think one of the other factors that to look at in these, and it'll probably show in these numbers as well, is labor at higher ed. So a lot of inability to hire, food service staff to fully staff what they need. And so in turn, that's affecting their purchasing decisions. So they're buying now more actually processed or pre-processed.
So they don't have to fool with it.
Yeah. And so that in turn has shifted, what types of local products fit that those types of requirements. And there are products that do, but there's still just some shift of trying to meet that now new demand for that type of more processed product.
The hospitals, Sodexo, UVM, for instance, they found that if they bought, say, whole squash, right? And they processed that, they could get a better price buying a whole couple of cases of squash, having the staff cut it up. They could freeze it, they could turn it into soups, they could do all sorts of stuff with it, right? They could buy it when it was in season, where they could get a good price for it to meet their numbers. But that requires, as Jake said, that you have staff on board to do the cutting.
Right.
And
Right,
the
that's
dishwashing
tough right
and all of that stuff. And that's what we have found very directly, hearing from Jake serves on the advisory committee for Vermont, for Sodexo at UVM. And that's one of the big things that we've learned from them on the inside, is they're like, our numbers aren't going to be as good, but it's not because of lack of trying. They have, they might
We
have 10
can't find
positions,
dishwashers.
right?
We've gone a month with paper. We went a month with paper plates at the college. Wow. So couldn't find anybody to help do dishes. I mean, that's how bad the situation is out there.
Yeah, that's
For
not
jobs.
good.
Yeah.
Landfills fill up.
Right.
in the nice plates sitting covered and.
Right, right.
So, just last thing that I'll just say, if you turn to page 43, 42, 43.
Before you
Yeah,
leave
yeah, please.
29, what about the institutions? The state institutions?
It's really small, and it's been one of those areas that's been really hard to get data, because in order for us to get this data, somebody has to collect it, organize it, and be willing to give it to us. In the early counts, we had more ability to get those numbers, and we just haven't gotten them. It's also the case after we had Irene, Tropical Storm Irene, and that cafeteria was a big one when AHS was, over in Waterbury. And so just some of the physical locations just are not having cafeterias as much. And so it's still a sliver. It's an important thing. It's something you guys could absolutely push on some more now that we're, getting on the other side of COVID and things are opening back up. But, upstairs, I know the Abbey group, are they still the Abbey group?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do a good job. They try to source as much local as possible. But I don't think did we ever get data from them?
No, I'm trying to think the last time that, yeah, we do have Abbey Group data. I'm not sure if it includes this
Cafeteria.
as part of it, yeah.
So it's not necessarily broken out when we get it. So that's part of the data challenge, is just collecting things in the way that we need it. But yes, I think we can keep pushing on that for sure. Page 42, 43, just so that you have a sense of the level of sort of where is the funding coming from for all of this. So over the 10-year period, we've raised close to $5.8 million for the Farm to Plate Investment Program. Typically, $100,000 comes every year from general fund appropriation through the Agency of Agriculture to us. And there are times when there might be like a working lands grant for a project that we are project managing. It doesn't ultimately live with us and pay for our staff, but it flows through us to somebody else. So that gets counted that way. And we do use some of our Agency of Commerce funding, which is really operational support, just sort of covers the basics of like the fact that we have an office and that we have phones and we have staff and such. So the state contribution really was a 1.6 million of the 5.8 million. And so the rest of it's coming from foundations that we're raising funding for. This is funding that the state government can't access. This is coming from philanthropic dollars, some federal sources, sponsorships from businesses that have supported what we're working on, and various miscellaneous other things, the gathering and such, which really we're subsidizing the cost of the gathering. But you can just get a general sense of how much goes towards personnel versus special projects over the years. And a lot of it is really, the majority of it really is going to the actual working of the network and the projects. Jake runs a lean machine with very little staff, and we rely on a lot of consultants to do various pieces. One of the things he can touch on if you're interested is we in 2015-16 we started to provide free technical support to independently owned grocery stores, food co-ops, and if other stores were interested, we wouldn't say no, but we were really focusing on the independents and the co-ops about how to develop a stronger local sourcing program in their store as a differentiator with, say, Shaw's or Hannaford's or whatever. And because they're in rural locations, we can have relationships with them. They live in the community. They tend to be more responsive to their customers and what they want. So Annie Harlow has been on contract for 6 years now to basically provide a whole range of training, both one-on-one in the store, as well as bringing folks together from across the supply chain, distributors. She has developed now a list, a database basically of all the Vermont products. She's constantly adding to it. The Vermont products that are produced and which distributors are carrying them and which stores they're in. So when she goes and meets with a store and says, I really would like to have, more variety of this, or I'd like to try this kind of a product. I don't know. I have no idea how to find that. she has a little database now. She can look at, she can, oh, well, there's this, this, and this, and these are the distributors that carry them. Oh, and you work with that distributor. Why don't you ask them if you can carry that, they can get that product for you?
Yeah.
Right? So it's that kind of stuff that we can do, getting again to the underneath. So you might say, well, why can't we get more local food and grocery stores? Well, there's a lot of structural impediments to doing that, a lot of issues. So we're trying now, we're really focusing, spending a lot of time really trying to focus on how do we understand, how do we help producers get into more traditional retail stores? Because that's where the majority of Vermonters and other people shop. So we have to crack that nut. And it's not easy. It's more complicated and complex than the institutional markets. And we need to understand how it works so that our producers have the best chance possible to get their products in there.
And what about school meals through the Farm to Plate? There's some of those groups. Do you work
Yes.
anything with them?
Yep.
Because there's a lot of meals that
Yep.
are handed out.
Yep, yep. I mean, I think universal school meals is really critical. The additional local per plate additional cost that you guys did last year is really important. It makes a big difference to their school's ability to source more. Farm to School is the whole Farm to School network is very much a part of Farm to Plate, and Jake serves on the
Common Circle.
Common Circle.
Kelly's now.
Okay, yeah, so we're part of that organizing,
Yeah.
like higher level coordinating, again, so we have coordination, so we have alignment, so we can maximize and not duplicate effort.
Brian?
So if somebody were to ask me, who's new to the committee, what you guys, like your elevator pitch, what you do, how would you describe it?
Yeah.
Just,
Sure, so we.
is it really getting local food onto the plates of Vermonters and restaurants?
Yes.
That's what drives you guys every day.
Yes,
Okay, whether it's in schools or
Yeah.
restaurants, okay.
it's
that's helpful.
increasing local consumption of locally produced food, but in order to do that,
Yeah,
we have to understand all the ways that happens.
yeah,
And where there are bottlenecks, where
Right.
there's challenges, where things are working good that need to be amplified and expanded and scaled properly.
okay,
But ultimately, at the end of the day, what we are guided by is the three outcomes of this the legislation that makes this. And that's on, if you switch now to the plan,
yeah,
and we'll hand it over to Jake in a minute, page 6, up at the top, what guides us is the statute of increasing sustainable economic development and create jobs in Vermont's food and farm sector,
great,
improve soils, water resiliency and working landscape in the face of climate change, and improve access to healthy local food for all Vermonters. That is mission 1 for us. And we have set, as Jake will mention, we have set a target that by 2030, we would like to get to 25% local food consumption in the state. We're at 16 as of 2020. It's a big lift. There's a lot of, we got a lot of the low hanging fruit that was taken care of. The stuff that's ahead of us is harder. But what we've noticed is that people are even more focused and more like straight ahead, this committed and motivated to move things forward. And I will say that what we're doing in Vermont is not in isolation. Couple things to know. This plan is considered the gold standard in the whole country.
Wow.
People look to this. We've gotten phone calls from, had the pandemic not happened, I would have been on a plane to South Korea to give a 15-minute talk about Vermont Farm to Plate. Jake would have been for a whole week on a speaking tour in Australia. Literally, like when the pandemic hit, we had to cancel
I had to
plans.
make a decision on a Friday.
Wow.
The Saturday before I was flying.
Well, if you'd have gone, you might have still been there.
I think so, yeah.
That's exactly
My brother
right.
works for the airlines and he said, Jake,
You're
you
probably
go,
out
you're
of
not
accent,
coming back.
yeah.
Right, so
That's tempting.
Yeah.
Right.
except he had a 1-year-old, so.
Oh, that's,
yeah. So
Yeah.
the point is that what we're doing in Vermont is being watched across the country and in other parts on the planet. And we are the leading edge, the trendsetter for the other 5 New England states. right? I'm actively involved with our counterparts in the other 5 New England states. As Senator Starr knows, we have a project called New England Feeding New England.
We saw
And-
that, yeah.
And we're trying to get to the point of, we've set a target, which is gonna be wicked hard to reach, if not really, yeah. But to get to 30% by 2030 in regional food consumption. What that means is Vermont and Maine need to increase our food production, which means we need to secure our land base. We need more access to getting more ag land back into production. We need to be able to have a greater ability to get Vermont products to the southern New England markets, get into those markets, get into grocery stores where most people shop. And that involves distribution, that involves storage and aggregation facilities. It involves more processing, So the work that we're doing in Vermont has been, over the last 10 years, has been to solidify and strengthen our leadership and our ability to produce more and move more food into the Vermont market, but also the rest of New England. And then this next 10-year period is how do we really scale that and do even more? Because we know that the majority of Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Massachusetts, other than maybe the Pioneer Valley in Massachusetts and maybe a little bit over near Gloucester and some of the seafood, most of the production happens in Maine and Vermont for the southern New England. They are the eaters, we are the producers, right?
And what about our processing ability? And if that food is processed here, then it needs to be distributed from here. Is that coming along with the additional growers and people that are bringing this to our forefront?
Yeah, do you want to take that one? Because there's there's so many more smaller distributors now than there were even 10 years ago.
Yeah. So, a lot of the food hubs that started up in the 2010 or a few years before that have now, evolved and scaled, and they're actually moving food into the Mid-Atlantic even at this point, in coordination with other regional food hubs. So looking more to the Boston area, New York City, those metropolitan areas. But some of the issues around that are infrastructure for distribution.
Yeah.
So it's not just about having trucks, it's about having cross-docking that allows for efficient exchange of and packing and then movement of that food to the locations that need it. So that's an area that is ripe for investment. I think also just thinking strategically as a region about where those locations are, where they can improve efficiencies. And then there's also just a lot of labor shortages in trucking itself. So that's a big issue as well that's holding back some of our distribution. And then warehousing and storage. So you've got different types of storage needs.
Plan like where these buildings or processors should be located, and
we're working on it. Yeah, there's a specific recommendation to fund the development of that plan, because it isn't something willy-nilly that you just kind of point at somewhere on a map. Yeah, there's
all planned and thought through.
Exactly. And one of the big impediments to say getting into New York City is when you start getting into the city, things start slowing down, and with all of the hour requirements for drivers and other issues, gas prices, right? Though having full trucks there and back becomes really essential to make the distribution business cost efficient. So working out those issues at a very analytical level is something that we're interested in looking to do more of, and to have then more of a plan that we can say we need investment in these 10 facilities in these locations. But regardless of that, I think our independent distributors, our food hubs, they have also just storage and say cross-docking infrastructure needs just for their own sites right now that they clearly could probably put together a number. and it be in the, we're talking like millions, just in, amongst a number of distributors in the state of Vermont.
See, with the ARPA funds, but those go away in 26.
Yeah,
We've only got, a few years of that left, but, we ought to be getting some of that money to put into the food systems.
yeah,
To protect our people so that we have,
yeah,
have a system. We should have one well set up, but we've only got, 3-4 years to
yeah.
capitalize on that
Yeah,
money.
and I know that there are, some conversations happening around how can federal transportation dollars be used more for these types of food infrastructure, transportation infrastructure projects. So trying to connect more dots there, or sort of move money at the federal level to the state level, then to these food infrastructure, distribution infrastructure needs, I think, is another potentially ripe area.
And I think the IRA bill for the federal government, the Infrastructure Reinvestment Act, is probably more applicable than ARPA. Because one of the things, for instance, you all approved last year a one-time $2 million to add to the Working Lands Enterprise Fund.
Yeah.
It turns out that it ended up being ARPA dollars rather than general fund dollars. And as a result, those $2 million are heavily restricted. It can only go for actual farm producers or loggers. Can't even go to sawmill owners, right, on the working land side. So the point is that those dollars, the ARPA dollars, are very focused on proving that you have a COVID negative impact. Yeah. The reality is what we really want to be doing at this point is investing in the future. Yeah. And that's not what ARPA was designed for, right? But the IRA bill is. So the infrastructure, getting the infrastructure bill like better dialed in terms of what the opportunities are for individual businesses or for the state to go after. That's where we think the bigger play and the transportation money, those kinds of things that that's where the money could get moved in service to what we really need on the distribution front.
Do you know if we have any these produce growers that are making a living from what they're growing, or?
The larger ones, absolutely. The challenge with the larger ones, they have been around longer, and succession is a big challenge because many of them do not have the next generation lined up. Some of them are the largest producers in the state. And so there's a little bit of a crisis for sure that we're like, right? Part of it is, and again, I'll hand it over to Jake here, but the one of the recommendations is that we need more boots on the ground of people that are technical and business service providers, because what we don't have is enough people who are skilled in helping to work with farm families to help them with their succession plan, which sometimes can take 3 to 5 years to make happen, right?
See,
it's not something
Gusto had somebody that
they're adding, but it's still not enough. It's like the scale of what the problem is not something that adding 1 or 2 more people is going to do it. It really needs to be. We counted up from all the recommendations from the different briefs. There was like 33 additional service providers that were needed. And that's not just succession. That's like technical aspects around vegetable production, getting into wholesale markets, working with distributors, like the whole range, more business planners, the whole range of service providers, including environmental and working on and water quality, soil health, all those kinds of technical types of entities. So the point is that it's not just putting more land into production and then just like, oh, okay, we got 500,000 more acres going. It's like you got to have the capital, you got to have the people, you got to have the infrastructure that's the right type of infrastructure. You got to have the technical service and business planner service providers, helping to figure out what's the business model that's going to work. All those kinds of things go together.
Yeah, we, on the just succession planning technical assistance alone, we accounted for additional FTEs needed, two dedicated to dairy, 2 for other types of farms, and I think produce would probably be, definitely one of those 2.
Yeah. So,
So these people, they've been at it long enough. So they're old enough to retire.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
you think about the Deep Root Co-op, organic co-op, right? That's a lot of the growers are in your area and then southern Quebec. They're all in their 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
And they're some of the most experienced, the largest acres under production, selling into wholesale markets. We're really worried about them.
And then I think on the younger side is there are profitable, young produce producers who are probably right now leasing, land from some of those more
They
established
don't.
growers.
Oh,
Yeah, and they might be, leasing 5 to 10 acres looking to purchase, but now purchasing 5 to 10 acres is potentially $1 million deal rather than, hundreds of thousands or low hundreds.
Now, even working through the land trust, it gets to be very expensive.
Yeah,
Because I don't see why they couldn't grow veggies on conserved land.
and the conservation process, it takes time. So sometimes trying to line up how quickly that can happen with how quickly you need to get onto a parcel of land to really make your business grow. Lining those things up takes time. And I think the rate at which we need things to happen is quicker than the rate at which the tools we have right now allow for change. So.
Brian?
Would you define for me what a food hub is, what it is and where they are in the state right now?
Yeah, I wish I had the formal definition.
Sure, no,
but
but
yeah.
just a general,
Yeah.
just give me a sense.
So you can think of it as, it's oftentimes the term is used for nonprofits, but it could be a
Okay.
for-profit that aggregates, stores, and distributes food.
Got it.
That's, and part of that could also be the marketing and sales of that food. So there might be like a brand component to it. And in relation to like food hubs, they emerged as meeting a market need to sell local food to institutions, because institutions needing more like volume, rather than buying from individual producers, could go to a food hub who could say, yep, we've got, the volume of carrots you need that we're sourcing from multiple farms. So they provide also, I think, like a logistics service in that as well.
I know Hardwick, I think, does one.
Yeah.
Yeah, Center for Ag Economy, I mean, they took over the operation of Farm Connects,
Yeah.
right, which was an independently owned, but then when he wanted to retire, they were gonna lose all the trucks on the road. And so the Center for Ag Economy, which also manages the Vermont Food Venture Center, they took over that distribution business, and now what are they? I mean, John's got like 10 trucks on the road, something like that. I mean,
It's grown
it's amazing.
exponentially, and they Farm Connect services Green Mountain Farm to School, so they are in essence like the freight service for Green Mountain Farm to School, but Green Mountain Farm to School takes in the orders, and they're like the platform for schools to order the food.
Where are they in Vermont right now? Where are our food hubs?
So there's the Farm Connects, which is Northeast Kingdom. We have Food Connects down in Brattleboro.
Okay.
Services a little bit of anything.
Yeah, and then there's the Intervale Food Hub. We used to have the Mad River Food Hub, but that is now,
Was that gone?
I think they might still distribute beer technically.
No, I don't think,
Okay,
no.
that's not
The
right.
Lawson's took
Yeah,
that back over.
okay.
Yeah.
And then there's also the Farmers Food Center in Rutland. And then there's also Acorn in Addison, which is the Addison County Relocalization Network. So Green Mountain Farm to School, Intervale, Food Connect, and CAE work. They also have a collaborative agreement. So they're trying to work out like shared inventory and sales and logistics of, Farm Connect sort of taking in an order and then moving it to, or Food Connect taking an order, but getting that product from, say, Farm Connects up in Hardwick.
But when we first started and these nonprofits in particular were just really getting going, I think at the time Intervale was probably at about 400,000, 500,000 in sales, something like that. And now collectively combined, I bet they're probably north of 5 million together. So it has really grown. They're moving a lot more food and they're doing a lot of the last mile stuff that is the hardest. And it's stuff, they're picking up stuff that Black River Produce will no longer do because they were taken over by Reinhardt, and then was taken over by Performance Food Group, one of the largest distributors in the country, multiple billion-dollar business. So yeah, they serve an important role, and part of what they've been trying to do is to get to scale. Some of them are thinking about spinning off the food distribution component to being an L3C private enterprise rather than a nonprofit. That's all still very much in discussion, but they're sort of growing up, so to speak, as food hubs, just as this work in food systems has been growing up over the last 10 years. So.
And we got a big appropriation. I don't know if have you helped with the Bennington one? We got the appropriation from Welch. I think it's getting close to.
We'll have to talk.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, so there's definitely some funding needs. The Working Lands Enterprise Board has definitely been trying to encourage proposals and fund proposals that are strengthening that distribution and storage and aggregation function within the system. So there has been a lot of movement in that area, but more.
But you would think that, if you're a farmer and you sell your property through the Lancaster Conservation Program, I don't see why, if we're putting the money in others to buy those conservation rights, why some of that shouldn't be kind of certain pieces of it shouldn't be set aside for vegetable and produce, because you can't grow veggies in certain types of soil. And most farms have a combo of soil types, and most farms are, we have a lot of people that want to have small farms, and I don't see why they need an 80 or 100 cow sized farm to keep 50 on or 40 on, and why some of that land couldn't be set aside to be sold to a veggie producer. You can't afford, I don't think you can afford to pay $4,000 or $5,000 an acre for property to grow veggies.
Yeah, I mean, one of my neighbors of a sort, a couple miles down the road, he's who we buy our winter CSA share from, Burnt Rock Farm. It's in Hanksville, Huntington area, and it's in the Huntington River Valley there. And he started off, bought an old farmhouse, and he actually had originally worked for David Zuckerman on Full Moon Farm before starting off on his own, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago. And, he started off with, I think, probably about 10 acres, something like that, a little less than 10 acres, diversified. He decided he was going to he did winter farmers market, and he was going to really focus on wholesale production of root crops and stuff that was like winter storage crops. That was going to be his niche. And he has steadily grown that business incredibly. I've watched it over the years. But what he has to do to get enough land to grow, like he's maxed out his home farm site. You probably have driven through the Huntington River Valley, right? There's like a little 2 acres here and a little 5 acres there. And there's like tucked back behind some houses, 5 acres there. And he is methodically gone after to get either leases or buy those parcels up. Because there's nobody, otherwise they're gonna be paid, or corn,
Or nothing.
or nothing. And he's added, I think he's now up to 25 acres, but it has taken him a long time, and it's not contiguous. So he has to stage where his tractors and stuff, and they're spending a lot of time on the road moving tractors and moving material and moving bins when they've done harvesting, because they can't get access to a large enough contiguous piece. On the flip side, as you say, a dairy farm, let's say, that wants to sell 200 acres or 100 acres, like, he's never gonna be able to afford that. And he doesn't need that many acres. So what's the legal structure that's needed to try to get multiple farmers on that property? Is that land, like, is it gonna be conventional organic? If it's gonna be organic, then you got 3-year cycle before you can actually get certification. If you buy a farm that was a dairy farm, all of a sudden you've got all this infrastructure that you have to pay for, but you may not need it. And you need different types of infrastructure. So a lot of young farmers get on property, they spend all of their money to get on the land, they get help, from lots of different sources, but then you need working capital. You need the money to be able to buy the hoop house and the extra bigger tractor and there's all of those additional costs that come into it when you're gonna do that kind of a transition. And that's not to say that it doesn't happen, because it does. The challenge is we don't have enough funding that's moving in that direction that enables it to be possible for that next generation. They don't come from a farm family, but they really want to get into farming, the business of farming. It can be really challenging unless you come from money.
Unless you
Online.
come from money.
Unless you
It's
come from money.
absolutely right, because they can't borrow any money.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a piece of land, and right behind it, 35 acres in the floodplain. It's #1 floodplain. The development rights were sold. It just sold for $5,000 an acre, $175,000 for land in the floodplain that the development rights are gone. And no young person can go any place and get the financing to get on to the property. Then let alone buy your tractors, buy your equipment to get organized. I sat yesterday with a young farmer who's filling out a grant to buy, and this is bigger than.
Yeah.
because This is a no-till cedar,
Yeah.
and can get a grant for between $5,000 and $40,000. But for the cedar, and the cedar's gonna cost $100,000.
Yeah.
So,
I think he ought to share with some.
But then you gotta be adjacent. You gotta be able to transport it.
Right, and those
I mean,
first 5 years of the business are probably the hardest to establish the cash flow to be profitable as well. So now you're carrying higher land costs, higher equipment and infrastructure costs. You're trying to get rid of infrastructure, which requires capital. So the conditions facing new young farmers is much different now than it was in 1960 in Vermont. Just the capital requirements alone are astronomically big.
I don't see it as much different than the 1960s or 70s. Even with farm fields, they did no planning then. They aren't doing planning now, and then the generation handing off is looking for their retirement and the investment that they have in the property and the land, and the next generation has to pay to retire.
Mhm.
I watched that with my father, and he retired. He bought my grandfather out in 1971, but it's the same basic issue.
Yes, sir. So why don't we shift over to walking you through the plan and how to use it, if that is okay with you?
That's good.
All right. Yeah, so hopefully by the end of this, what seems like a very large document will actually be accessible to you all. And as I go through this, you'll see that there will be different ways that you can reference and use this. You can go really deep, or you can be very selective in how you reference it. So there's a lot of different ways to use it to what you're interested in. And as Ellen mentioned, so in 2019, Farm to Plate Investment Program was reauthorized, so established the need to create another 10-year strategic plan, which this is. And with that, the three outcomes of that legislation really flow through the entirety of this. And that is, again, on page 6. So increase sustainable economic development, create jobs in Vermont's food and farm sector. So that's the real economic development and economic viability. Then the second is improve soils, water, and resiliency of the working landscape in the face of climate change. So we've got that, sustainability, environmental sustainability, and resiliency component. And then the last one, improve access to healthy local foods for all Vermonters. So really trying to have equity in the system, everyone has access to it. And you will find those three outcomes really are reflected throughout this. And then also note that we added a commitment to racial equity, because those three don't happen if we in fact don't have considerations for racial equity in all of them. And so, a food system that leaves people behind is not sustainable, is not economically successful, or environmentally sustainable. So that is just, keep that in mind as you go through this, that really that's the foundation. And then if you turn to page, let's see, it's 9, there's an understanding the plan. You might not be able to see the page number, so look for page 8. And so what we do is taking those three outcomes, the commitment to racial equity, is then the plan has a vision, right, of what do we want the food system to look like in 2030? What does it feel like? And that also is a way in which to just, always kind of guide us in what we're doing. From the vision, there's then 15 strategic goals. So those are the high level signposts of, the directions we want to go in. Each goal has measurable objectives, and I'll talk more about each of these as we go through. So we have actually measurable indicators for all of our goals to at least give us a signal of progress. Like, how are we, it helps us ask the question, how are we doing on these goals? And then we have the priority strategies, which are what are the actual programs, investments, policies that we need to do in order to get to our goals to fulfill this vision that we've created for our food system. And those priority strategies, so there's 34, but they're a distillation of what are 276 recommendations from product, market, and issue briefs, which I'm going to go to next. So know that we have these briefs that are dedicated to a particular topic, and from that there's recommendations in each of those. And what we did was, looking at all of the recommendations together, tried to synthesize them into 34 priority strategies. So that's a better way of kind of seeing that, these recommendations relate in this way, and that there's a priority strategy that we can look to that if we implement has a big impact on a lot of different recommendations. So let me go to the briefs, because that'll be a good place, topically, to orient you to what is included in this plan. So if you go to page 37, and that's also why the document is so large, is there are 54 of these briefs that are most of them are 2 pages. There's a few that are 4, and the dairy brief is 8. So they're meant to be short and accessible, and cover issues in a very standardized way, so you can kind of start to synthesize.
You can see, like, this is the briefs,
Yeah.
and this is the plan.
Yeah. So
A lot of good material for
Exactly.
people to do backup.
Exactly. Yeah. And so the way it's organized, as you'll see on the table of contents, is we have a little description of the methodology, but then the product briefs, there's another table of contents on page 39. The market briefs are on page 99, and then the issue briefs on page 121. So let's go to the product briefs on 39, which is actually just turn the page. So here are all the products that we've covered in more depth and detail listed here, and by page number. So anything from agroforestry to goats, grapes, hops, produce, spirits, wine. If you have any questions about what's happening in any of those product categories or what the specific needs or market trends are, you can reference these briefs to do that.
Page that,
Yeah, and so let's,
So pick one. What do you want to know about?
want to know how the bees are doing.
yes.
There you go.
All right, let's go bees and
All
honey,
right, so
47.
47. So what you'll find is that each of these briefs, including bees and honey, opens with a what's at stake statement. And that really gives you the most concise statement about really like what's important, what to be thinking about, what to focus your attention on, sort of main issues and challenges in a very concise statement. From that what's at stake, then every brief has a current conditions section, which gives you some data, the most recent data that we have on that, some summary of key trends or just things that have happened over the years. And then usually there's a featured infographic or data on the right-hand side. So in this case, colony losses by county is the featured data piece. Then on the second page, after you get a sense of the conditions, then we summarize bottlenecks and gaps, and then opportunities. And then from that, we go to recommendations. So in this way, as you get a sense of the bottlenecks and gaps, the opportunities, they should flow into then the recommendations to either take advantage of the opportunities or address the bottlenecks and gaps. And in that way, again, really quick way to reference things, to understand and differentiate between, what are the strengths we have here that could be opportunities, or what are the gaps and things that need addressing or further investment or investigation. And so, yeah, those then each usually has around 5 recommendations. Some might have a little more, some might have a little less. And so that's, and then, yes, also note that these briefs are, not just written by the VSJF staff or Ellen and I. These are all written by a content expert, which is listed, the lead author, and then they worked with a team of contributing authors who are also other content experts. So this, is coming from a community of experts who have spent their life and experiences around this product area.
When we solicited lead authors and encouraged, helped them to identify the contributors, one of the things that we told them we wanted was, this is not about creating recommendations that one organization thinks is the idea here, right? We wanted them to represent, in this case, say, the entire bee and honey community. Mm-hmm. And we wanted to get to a point where if some other beekeeper who wasn't part of the process read this, they would be like, that about summarizes it. It's like about 80 to 90%, like, yeah, I agree with what's in there, because we wanted to create these briefs in a way that would give you guys guidance and to know and have confidence that if you read this, the business folks connected to this brief are going to be like, yeah, that's I can get behind that. That's about right.
And I think the other thing to note too about these recommendations is that some of them are very, you might say, prescriptive, like they're very concise, they're directed at a very specific thing. Others might be a little more general, so there's more room to navigate what the policy solution is, or the amount of money required, or there might be further testimony that could fulfill, kind of fill this out and give more specifics to what's needed. So they're not meant to be interpreted as like, this is the by the word what needs to happen. There is room to interpret and investigate further, but at least it gives you that sense of direction and some specifics as to what could impact the industry.
If you were going to have somebody come in to talk to you about eggs or goats, before they come in, read the 2-pager.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Good
Give
idea.
us what I got.
Yeah.
So when
Now-
is this completed?
we published it in February 21.
And is there gonna be some periodic review in the future to say, we should update this in progress reports based upon this. You know, I went
Yeah,
right
we
to the
should.
slaughterhouse piece and started reading that and I know exactly who I'm gonna take that to.
Yeah,
I like it.
I like it too.
The whole
Yeah.
layout of this and I really like it, but
Yeah.
how often should
Yeah.
we upgrade this?
Mhm.
And, will we by section get a progress report? Are we making any ground?
If you're lucky, you might make it to the next rewrite.
Wait for the next what?
Rewrite.
You're right.
Well, with my color here, I'll probably be done. And if it is 20 years before it's done again.
No, you need 10 now. You only got 7 to go.
So a few ways in which we'll track progress and in essence keep, update this is, so that's our annual reports are meant to be a reflection of changes and also referencing what the baseline is from the plan. And then also we have a master spreadsheet where we are tracking the recommendations individually and accounting for major changes. And then also we have, I mentioned there's measurable objectives tied to each goal. So we have indicators of aggregate data that we can say is a reflection of, the changes that have happened in this industry. You can see some of that in the changes in these indicators, which those are updated on different schedules depending on when data becomes available. And I think probably we'll do a mid-10, like a 5-year process of reflecting on where this stands and summarizing, synthesizing the progress.
in the ag census, for instance, which has so much of the data that helps, especially on the product briefs, only comes out, is collected every 5 years. And then it takes another couple of years after they've collected it before we actually get the data. So there's always a lag. So for instance, when we did the first plan in 2011, we published it in fiscal year 2015, we did do that sort of midpoint check-in. And we were able to use the latest census data, which was already at that point 3 years old technically. But that was the best we could do in terms of what's available data. So we'll do that as they.
I just worry about
Yeah.
this because if I look at, and you've got a section on beer, you've got a section on, if I look at those businesses and we sat here last week talking about cheese. Those business areas are changing so fast now.
Yeah.
That,
Yes.
and if this is, this is great.
Yeah, yeah.
It would be great too, but
Yes,
you can't wait 10 years.
totally get,
Yeah.
yeah, totally get it. And that's part of the reason why we developed the Farm to Plate network of all the organizations that are part of the food system to actually be working on the implementation, because that's going to give us the ability to make adjustments and to address problems as they are arising and not at this sort of static point where we take a snapshot of what's going on.
So how does the policy interact with the Global Warming Solutions Act? Because I know ag has a certain reduction that it has to meet.
Mhm.
I understand this was published before it was passed.
Yeah.
But there are a bunch of things that have to be done.
Yeah.
And so how do you kind of connect those two
Yeah.
to get so that ag meets its goals?
Yeah. So there's also a climate change brief, but the mitigation requirements of the climate plan and legislation have our mandates in essence of reduction. Then there are also the adaptation and resiliency components of the plan that don't have measurable targets, which is where there are a lot of additional food system recommendations contained in the climate action plan. So there's some question of how do we put actual teeth or force to that part of the plan?
Or recommendations?
And those recommendations, as Ellen said before, are in many cases adapted or straight adopted from this plan. So you will see recommendations that might look exactly the same in the climate action plan in certain sections as they do here. But those are most likely going to be in the more related to adaptation resiliency aspects, not the mandated mitigation reduction targets. So that's, I don't know if that's, that might not answer it directly, but because,
So
yeah, we didn't know
needs
what
to be
those
at
targets.
certain goals, so
Yeah.
that'll come out in
Right, and the-
time. How you might recommend if there's something a beekeeper does, or a dairy, or
Right.
or poultry, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think because this came out before,
Yeah.
we didn't know what the regulatory
Right.
targets were going to
Yeah,
be.
yeah,
And now, the Agency of Ag has a mandate to regulate
Right.
towards those
Okay.
targets for agriculture as a sector.
thanks.
Yeah.
When you were putting all the products together and talking with people, was there ever any value associated with producing certain products that carried the Vermont name to market? And if did that make a difference to some people?
Yeah. So if you go in the issue briefs, which start on page 121, then there is a consumer demand issue brief on page 145.
Marketing.
And marketing 169, but the consumer demand brief on 145 does a good job of synthesizing consumer market trends and preferences, and also looking at past research on this issue. And I think there are cases where, yes, the Vermont name and brand means something, but it's usually to people who've had an experience here in Vermont. So they have,
Here,
yeah.
elsewhere.
And for those that don't, the notion of the Vermont brand doesn't necessarily carry as much value or weight in the marketplace. They're looking more at then specific attributes around health, or the taste, the quality of the product. And that has gotten very competitive. We're seeing that happen for, no longer can you say the product is organic and that just sways a consumer to buy it. It's got to be organic, that's grass fed, that's has these health benefits, and really a lot of value laden attributes to products now. So it's much harder to gain the consumers their attention and their loyalty to your product. And so the Vermont brand has limitations in the marketplace right now. But for those who have been to Vermont and have that experience, Vermont then becomes a signifier for all the things that that they've experienced here. And that's a quick reference for them to say, oh, I know what Vermont's about. That has Vermont on it. It must be good. And they have a trust in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And on that 145 page,
Yeah.
farm raised farm seafood.
Yeah.
What went on with those two? Is there something there that?
Yes, I think that speaks to consumer preferences, where, say, for farm seafood not carrying significance for consumer about the sustainability of the product. If they see it as farm seafood, they think, oh, there's maybe a lot of energy use going into that. Why isn't it wild caught? It might not be as good as something that's wild caught. That kind of thing. Yeah.
So farm raised might be that they're raised on the farm and then they go to a finisher CAFO, right? As opposed to grass fed has a higher awareness around that maybe the animals are treated better. And of course, a lot of this stuff is perception,
Oh, yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
we don't actually have a label in this country with stringent rules around what does it mean to be grass fed, which we call attention to as something we need. Because
You don't know if that means grass in the barn that you feed them or grass
Yeah.
out in the field. that
for a
they-
month or
Yeah.
the whole life,
Yeah.
or
And there's federal labeling issues with product that is raised, say, in Argentina, it gets processed through a Cargill facility in the Midwest, it then gets a sticker that says a US product, or made, and that grass-fed product then is sold at a much lower price and takes premiums away from producers in our region. So there's some federal issues here as well.
Yeah.
So we've also got these market briefs. So there's also market briefs on, look at page 99. So it gets at some of your questions around hospitals and colleges and
And that's,
distribution.
yeah, you'll see distribution is in the market brief section, because seeing distribution as the means to reach all of those markets in different ways. Great. Yeah,
All
so.
sorts of topics.
So obviously, there's much more time that you can spend with all of these briefs, and then to know that we're going to shift over to talking about priority strategies. But before we do that, I want to reference also there's a table in the back, page 193. So on page 193, now you'll see where I was talking about the priority strategies are in some cases, in a lot of cases, a synthesis of a lot of recommendations. And this table shows you that connection. So you can see for any priority strategy, you can then see the individual recommendations that make up that strategy. So then you can, if you're seeing that a lot of things that you're interested in a brief are tied to a priority strategy 4, then you can bring your attention to that priority strategy and think about, okay, how do we implement policy around this to implement the strategy.
And also gets to Jake's point that if you can solve for one of the priority strategies, it has a ripple effect across a lot of different products, markets, and issues potentially, depending on how many bullets are in that right-hand column. You take a look at number 8, for instance, on product-specific value chain, page 195. Producers, distributors, and buyers together at matchmaking events. That concept of matchmaking between producers and buyers showed up in all of these different briefs that are listed there, right? We wanted to create this table because it was a way to help us understand what's really the nub of the problem, and if we solve that one problem, it will have that ripple effect across multiple products and markets and issues. And so it's more strategic. It's a scalpel.
It's well done.
Yes, sir.
How is this being distributed?
So we designed our whole website around basically this new plan. So on the website is you can access all of this content. There's a plan specific page. You can look at actually the briefs online individually, and you don't need to
How
download
does
them.
some young farmer or somebody know to reach out to go there?
AgReview actually has the agency, because we did this in partnership with the agency all along the way. They have every month chosen one of the briefs to highlight, and it's almost published like exactly in there. We also have an e-newsletter that has about 8,000 subscribers, and many farmers get that.
And we feature
Different brief.
content from the strategic plan in every newsletter, trying to direct it towards a specific topic, and then say learn more, go to the plan, go to the website. We have listservs of our members that we distribute this content to, which that includes over 300 members and their organizations. I know there's TA providers who have are working with farms or might be working with a slaughter facility that have this on hand or know to reference it. So there's a lot of different ways that this information gets out actually into the world.
And that said, we do have some copies. They're as you can imagine, being fully color, they're not inexpensive to produce. But if somebody calls us up and they said, I really want a hard copy, are happy to send them.
Yeah, those out of staters, they must like to have a hard copy somewhere is kicking around to promote this kind of stuff when they go to meetings, I would think.
Yeah, it's a lot of people
No, it's a great
definitely
document.
reference it and use it,
It's
so
great.
you wanna jump into the
Yes,
strategy?
so just lastly, coming back to the priority strategies, which are on page 30, or the list starts on page 30. You'll see that, and I'll just wait for everyone to get there. So each priority strategy, you'll see there's a colored icon that follows it. So that is reference to the specific goal number and goal category that priority strategy is oriented to. So it's number one, providing at least $1.5 million for annual funding to the Working Lands Enterprise Fund. That touches upon the economic sort of development area, which is the purple color, and specifically goals 1 and 3. And then also 6 and 8 around environmental sustainability. So you have that additional system of reference that you can see how these strategies relate to achieving our strategic goals. And just I won't go into depth on each of these priority strategies, but just want to call out some themes here. So one obviously is WeLab, which we said we're strategic in saying at least $1.5 million for annual funding, knowing that it'd be great if it was more than that. And obviously there is a request to make it more this year, but stabilizing that base is also really essential and is a part of what this strategy is speaking to for business planning. And
That's been usually
Yeah.
one-time money
Right.
that's thrown in.
And having that predictability is really important. And the demand is certainly there, as we've been talking about. There's a lot of infrastructure needs and just transition funding and financing that's needed for farms at this point. 2 and 3 speak to developing funding mechanisms, funding opportunities that meet very specific food system investment gaps, and also particularly for underserved populations, BIPOC, women, and others. So that's what 2 and 3 covers. 5 is the dairy priority strategy. 6 is meat, anything related to meat processing, meat development. 7 and 8 are, as alluded to earlier, the need for not only just processing or distribution or storage infrastructure, but that each of our industries has very specific needs around those things. So the processing needs of produce growers is different than the processing needs of agroforestry or meat and livestock. And with that too is distribution infrastructure is a key for all of that. Storage is key for all of that. So just finding those interconnections of infrastructure, but also knowing that there are specific industry needs depending on the product type. 9 talks about land access and conservation programs. So there are some really great established programs, but they could absolutely innovate and develop additional programming with more resources. So that's what 9 is talking about. As we were referencing to earlier, there's a huge need for looking at multi-owner land ownership, working out the legal, the financial aspects of that, as we have large tracts of land that may not fit the needs of one particular producer, but could meet the needs of 4. And so that's an area of trying to find, are there policy incentives for that? Are there funding sources that could support pilot projects, that kind of thing. 10, 11, and 12 are about the business assistance and technical assistance needs that we were discussing. So one mechanism is BHCB and their farm and forest viability program. So making sure that they have their full allocation of funding, but then there are very specific needs, whether it's the transition planning but then also production technical assistance. So again, different industries have very different production technical assistance needs, and we don't have a lot of depth with that. So there's not a lot of capacity for livestock production technical assistance, for example. So how can we find ways to increase that capacity? Then looking at 15, 16, and 17, those are oriented around marketing. The 15 talks about producer associations, so they're play a real vital role in promoting, marketing their members, and doing so on very limited dollars. And then 16 talks about statewide marketing. So whether we're talking about Department of Tourism and Marketing or the Agency of Ag, just Vermont has historically underfunded our marketing, and the Agency of Agriculture doesn't have any specific appropriations for marketing. Department of Tourism and Marketing has, in relation to how big of an industry tourism is, has very limited money for that. And so that's one need. And then 17 speaks more to the specific business marketing needs of building business owners' capacity, acumen to market their products or to find the services that can provide that for them. And then turning the page. So just, I wanted to call out 20, that is a priority strategy around incentivizing the local purchasing reimbursement. So making that permanent would fulfill a priority strategy from the strategic plan. And then 22 is oriented around increasing funding for proven ways to alleviate food security. So that's where universal school meals would fulfill the priority strategy. That's where programs like maintaining funding for farm to school, injecting or putting money into crop cash farm share programs. Those are all proven ways to get local food to more Vermonters, make it more accessible. 24, and hopefully we'll hear more about this in the annual report, but maybe also in some dedicated time with the committee is the food security plan, which is in development. My colleague Becca Warren is working on that. And so by end of this year and the start of next legislative session, we will have a food security roadmap that will have some more policy recommendations to address food security in times of, not only in times of crisis, but how do we build out our food security in times of relative normalcy so that we're ready for those crisis moments, and whether that's pandemic or climate related. So that's what that is looking at, really making sure that food supply is secure and stable in all times, and that people have the ability to access food in all times. And there's a lot of complexity obviously involved with that. 26 is about climate related, climate adaptive funding. So there's a number of issues and maybe policies actually this legislative session related to that. And also the climate plan is how do we kind of make the connections that agriculture needs more support to adapt to climate change. And that's what 26 is speaking to. 27 is about the support for the Payment for Ecosystem Services Working Group. They have, I know, some recommendations coming forward about how to advance the Payment for Ecosystem Services, which is an important element of providing additional revenue to farms and acknowledging the public benefits that they're generating through their stewardship. So really continuing to support that work, and also advancing the recommendations that come out of that group, because they have spent 3 years of really dedicated time investigating the issue and trying to find ways to provide that support in a sustainable way. And then lastly is that 33 and 34 speak very directly to the issue of equity. 33 about all of our need to commit and prioritize actions that eradicate structural racism in the food system. And that includes uplifting, financially compensating the leadership, participation, representation of BIPOC. I know the Land Access Opportunity Board, maybe it's out, but they are also releasing a report soon that will have hopefully some policy related recommendations. And that work is, you know, really critical to accomplishing not only, you know, equity related goals, but also a lot of these, the other aspects of the strategic plan. And then 34 is more specific to just the need for some more research, data collection, investigation of racial equity in the food system. So when our team of authors was writing the racial equity brief, there was just a notable lack of data on racial equity that, you know, makes it hard to speak to policymakers about the issues and the potential interventions that could happen to address those issues. So those are the priority strategies, and I will stop there.
Yeah, well, that 30 through 34, 30, yeah, through 33, I guess it is.
Yeah,
Those are pages that we'd want to pay attention to.
Totally.
yeah,
And, well, Richie's our man on appropriations, so if you get shorted,
I think you're sitting at that table.
if you get shorted, blame him. If you get an increase, so you can call me.
I understand how this works.
But I think, you know, I think you folks have done a great job
Yeah,
presenting this, and what it represents is important for us to use for backup to issues where, you know, if we run into, don't usually run into many problems.
Everything's a problem.
Well, and you know, for Linda, too, given that you're always having to try to find people to testify on different things, you know, the lead authors and the contributing authors that are
Oh,
on
they're
these
all
briefs
in
are all
here.
right there, right? And if you need, you know, email addresses or whatever, we're always happy to help
Yeah,
identify people and stuff like that. So, you know, we tried to pack in a lot of important,
Wow.
useful information in concise as we could, to give you all a good reference document to work from.
no, there's a lot of good reference material here. It's a document that, boy, if somebody wanting to get into a certain line of ag, you know, we should be able to find some help here. And-
yeah.
And the names of who to call even.
We had a younger person come to the office, I can't remember what, but they mentioned that as part of class, they like built a business plan utilizing the plan, and that it was, you know, a great resource for that work and really gave them clarity. And we certainly heard stories about that with the first plan
Mhm.
of helping people identify what their niche really should be versus what they thought it should be, and, you know, creating successful businesses around that.
I mean, all the food system majors at UVM and the different food system programs, they're all using this in the classroom as base. Oh, yeah. So it's informing the next generation in terms of how to think about being entrepreneurial and all that. And I will say also on page 55, the dairy brief was put together. It's the longest one, as is appropriate. But the lead author was Laura Ginsburg at the Agency of Ag, and there was a number of contributing authors. And we wanted to make sure we got a real mixture of different types of dairy farms that were part of the contribution of this. But I think what's important to know, senators, is that this is in essence the roadmap for a lot of what is being distributed through the Vermont Dairy Business Innovation Center. The strategies for how to deploy those federal funds, not only in Vermont, but also the region, because it's a regional effort. You know, the roadmap is in here because Laura wrote it.
Oh,
Yeah.
So you read this, have Laura in, we'll give you a presentation on the Dairy Business Innovation Center, and you will see how it is actually those funds are being deployed in service to this building out of a transformed dairy industry that is conventional, it is organic, it is sustainable, it is viable, it's value added, it's commodity, it's the whole way in which that program is being rolled out, and the areas of focus for grant making the seeds of it are all in here.
Did you run into any discussions about having more processing of dairy products or different kinds of processing of dairy product? Like we process cheese and make all kinds of cheeses, yogurts, ice cream. I don't know, if we still ship, 30% of our milk out.
Right.
And, the value added stuff is supposedly where the money is, even though it has problems trickling down.
Yeah, if you look actually on page 60, it's in the dairy brief, there's a little graphic that shows that, where on-farm and off-farm processing of dairy has gone over a 10-year period. And it's quite remarkable, it went from 50-something to 151 of
That's why
going
you
from
don't want to
processing.
wait 10 years to do this again.
It's true. But the point is that, we flagged attention in the first plan to the need for more on-farm and in-state processing infrastructure and
Yes.
value-added processing happening. And it actually happened.
Yeah.
It really did. And so I think there is more opportunity there for sure.
We're doing really good we were advised what to do and we actually did it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet we're still, like your chart there on the left, well, that's a processing, but our farm numbers are way down,
Yep.
in the last from 10 to 20, it's really made quite a dive. And we built the processing to keep the value added here, but yet it never trickled down to the farmer. It got lost between the wholesalers and the retailers and the.
I somewhat agree with you, but we've got nearly the same number of cows. It's dropped off a little, but not, it's really the small farmers that we're losing.
Oh, they're getting bled out.
Yeah.
Yep, they're getting let out and the big firms are
Getting bigger.
getting bigger.
Consolidation.
And
But if you're a small farmer and your cows are worth $800 to $1,000 6 months ago. They're worth $1,700-1,800 today. And so your neighbor, who's the big farmer, comes along and says, "Oh, are you interested in selling your farm?" Well, why would the big farmer be interested in buying that little guy? Well, because he can take the production from those little cows from that little farm and move it to the big farm to boost his production or build it up. So, small farmer, yeah, I'll sell.
well,
For that kind of money, yeah, I'll sell.
well, particularly when you're, like you talked about earlier, older. You're
Yeah.
approaching retirement,
Yeah. Yeah.
when do I jump off?
Yeah.
and do
Totally.
that? The only thing I didn't see in here is like a focus of how do I transfer this farm to somebody else and where does that new person get the cows? If you're young and you're looking, a lot of people look at these and go say, I can never afford the capital to buy 3 tractors
Yeah.
and 100 and something.
That's where that selling the development rights and things like that
Yeah.
kick in.
Well, that's for the owner, that's the older. But if you're younger and you don't own it.
Yeah.
How do they know where to go to get? section in here that says, call this person to train,
Yeah.
to help you.
Well, and so we do
Yeah.
have a succession brief in here.
It is in
It-
Yeah.
We do have
And
one.
I didn't, I flipped it.
No, no, no,
And
it's
the young
fine.
farmer, which touches on
Yeah,
those issues. too.
Yeah, and so like we point at those things as being the issues and we did, and there's a, farmland access, is also part of that. And we have a capital, access to capital brief in here.
Good.
All of those things point at that, but you're absolutely touching on a really important thing. How do we knit all of those things, the pieces and the parts together to support that young person that wants to get get a new farm going, right? And as we mentioned before, there's not enough business advisors, technical providers on the ground with the knowledge of how to actually help a farm family walk through the process of doing that transfer. Because there's lots of different ways. And you know, it's still really challenging, as all farm family dynamics are really challenging, right? So thinking about transferring within an existing family situation from the 4th generation to the 5th generation, for instance, is one whole set of things. And then if you don't have the next generation in your family and you're wanting to pass it on to somebody that's not biologically related to you, that's another whole set of things that has to get worked through, right? That is potentially more money needed up front because you don't have the potential of, mom and dad are staying in the farmhouse for as long as they're gonna live.
I'm 25, I wanna, raise vegetables and I wanna buy 10 or 15
Right.
acres and I got no credit.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct. And you got a lot of student debt.
Yeah.
How old are you, Rich?
But there are little
I'm
things,
way past that.
but we didn't want to, like, in the workforce omnibus bill that happened last year, for instance. I can't remember if this stuck, but at one point we were talking about, could there be some kind of school loan, waiving of some portion of school loans for young people that wanted to get into the business of farming? That we could, as a state, say, okay, we're gonna make this investment, we're gonna make it easier for you to actually have some free cash because we're gonna take care of your school debt up to some dollar amount.
The 2+2 program, they get a free ride to
Right.
VTC and.
Right. But that's 5 a year.
Wow,
We need to get,
We
like, we could
always-
bump that up.
we always figured that
Diversify.
would be 15 to 20 a year, but.
Yeah.
The numbers haven't really, we got a high grade average. And the numbers haven't been there and it
Yeah.
hasn't been, I don't think that's been strongly promoted.
No, there's definitely some work that needs to be done there, and one of the recommendations that came out of that Vermont Tech ag transformation process was to signal, maybe given the changes going on in the types of agriculture, that it needs to not just be for dairy, but for diversified or livestock producers or whatever. So beefing it up to 15 to 20 a year with having some dedicated number for specifically to dairy, but then having other funds available for other types of farms could be a way to go forward.
Well, we don't even have the state of Vermont and its educational facilities doesn't have a milking herd to teach dairy. Pretty bad.
Yeah, it's
Oh, a lot of
interesting.
technical schools.
New Hampshire has one, they got a couple hundred farms. And kids want to go down there to school all the time. And New York's got them over there and they want to go over there.
You mean like the high schools don't have it? Yeah, we don't have any real,
Our
yeah.
colleges.
No, our colleges don't.
BTC sold their
Yeah.
cows.
Right.
UVM's got a few
Yeah.
cows, but it's for the little pre-vet people.
Yeah,
Our ag program at our technical school is gone. They do have Maple,
all right,
but
right.
they don't,
It's
and,
interesting.
one of the things we talked about earlier in here is the slaughterhouse stuff.
Yeah.
Unless you start catching some kids
Early.
Yeah,
early.
yeah. Nobody's gonna
You're
get
not
into it.
gonna,
It's a
they're
tough
not gonna
job,
go into the slaughterhouse when they're 30 years old. You
Yeah,
gotta get them when you're 16, 17, get them interested and then
Well, I would really encourage you to have Pat Moulton and Molly Willard in from Vermont Technical College. Pat Moulton now is, of course, the workforce director for the Vermont State Colleges, to talk about the ag transformation process. There's a new advisory board that's been established, really great group of people. You could have a couple of those folks in, and to learn about the plan changes to create the Center for Agriculture and Food Entrepreneurship at Vermont Tech. There's been a lot of funding that's been raised. They're just about ready to go out to hiring or to looking for a director for the center to really rebuild that program. And to have a lot of different types of hands-on learning for young people to go through that, a robust internship program. And which means that the kids can get out onto other people's farms to learn a lot of what's needed to know. So that would be a good update. They're putting together almost have all the money together to create a meat processing lab to actually, or on-site facility to teach meat cutting and meat processing, to service the job openings that exist in so many of the slaughter and meat processing plants that need workers. So lots to dive into to learn more about that for sure. And you have a chance.
Well,
Thank you so much.
next week, we're gonna do that joint,
Yep.
thing.
Yeah. We'll have a couple of beef farmers joining us, right?
Well, dairy farmers that are starting to get more involved with beef, I guess you could think of it as.
Yeah.
They are.
Yeah.
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 There's so much pasture land not being used. It's not the meadowland that doesn't get used. It's the pasture. Because as our dairy farms get larger, all the cows stay in the barn.
Mhm.
It's the small farm that's 50 cows that put the cows out to
Yeah.
pasture.
Yeah.
And that pasture land's just sitting there unused.
Yeah, and what we'll talk about next week is actually a good example of how we're trying to address this issue of, large dairies that may be selling their herds, but maintaining their land, looking for other options to how to utilize that, and creating an actual business model in the beef industry that can utilize that land at that scale. Because that's, one way to address this is to utilize livestock in another industry that can utilize land, at the 400 acre level.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well,
Thank you
any
so
other
much.
questions, Irene?
Someone over the weekend asked me about innovative farming, and I don't know if you have any briefs that speak to that, but UVM's got to be doing some really innovative research about what farming looks like in 10 or 20 years. What's a good way for our committee to find out more about the future of farming so that we direct our attention not just to the things that are working today, but as the bees disappear or the avian flu takes over, what should we be looking at? Is it the trellis? Like, that's even an idea, but
For down the road.
do we usually have UVM come in, some folks from the research
Extension.
department or the extension come in and talk to, I don't know, like
We
what's
have,
traditional?
Well, we got the president
Yep.
for.
That's a start.
But the extension people, we usually.
You usually have them in? Okay, because I want to make sure that I can answer this constituent next time I see them and say, yes, or
Yeah.
no, we didn't because of this reason.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think there's different ways that could look within a product area. I think there are certain product areas like agroforestry is an area of a lot of innovation and thinking. But yeah, you could look at, like, there's a lot of innovation happening within apples. That's the way growers are growing. But it's a good question too about, we don't have a brief say on like technology in the food system or how that's being implemented in Vermont at this stage. And there is a lot of cool things happening around tech in agriculture, even at a small scale.
Probably Heather Darby and Chris Callahan from UVM Extension are probably the two that would know it the most.
Yeah, Chris Callahan would be good, 'cause he's an engineer by training, and so I think he's probably in touch with a lot of developments.
Heather, she's on top. of it.
Yeah, Heather on the research side, and
And,
Yeah, have the UVM Extension Director, like, Beckford in, as along with Chris and
We had
Heather.
him in Well, he hadn't been hired too long the last time.
Lots happening there, so. it's good.
He's got a year or so under his belt, I think now.
Yeah, coming up on 2 in May.
Callahan's.
Chris Callahan, Heather Darby, and then the new extension director, Roy Redford. Yeah.
Well.
Thank you very much.
yeah,
Thank you so
Yeah.
much, really, for giving us this amount of time, really great.
Yeah, you'll get your bill though.
Apparently, we didn't get the calls out either.
We didn't get our fire drill.
If it does happen, if the evacuation happens between now and your afternoon committee, consider yourself part of this committee.
Okay.
Oh.
And go to the pink.
Okay.
Pink lady.
And don't worry about lunch.
Yeah, right. Lunch on the run.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you both.
Thanks.
Good job.
Excellent.
Sending